Okay, so get ready to have your mind blown, folks, because this deep dive, well, it takes us deep into the Venus Project. And let me tell you, this isn't just, some pie-in-the-sky utopian fantasy. It's about some seriously radical ideas about how, our whole society could be completely different.
Yeah, you're right on the money there. What we're really talking about here is a total paradigm shift. Venus Project, it's asking us to really imagine a world where money doesn't even exist and where instead of fighting over resources, we're managing them for everyone.
It sounds kind of crazy, doesn't it? Like, at first I was like, hold on a minute. Oh.
Hmm.
But the more I dug into it, the more I realized they're making a really interesting point. They're saying that so many of the problems we grapple with, things like poverty and conflict and even environmental destruction, they all kind of stem from this scarcity mindset, this idea that there's just not enough to go around.
Absolutely. The Venus Project, it proposes this really radical idea called a resource-based economy. Basically, instead of this constant struggle to divide up a limited pie, what if we focused on using technology and really smart resource management to make sure there's enough for everybody?
So it's less about how do I get mine and more about how do we use what we've got to take care of everybody. And get this, they actually believe that automation and AI are the keys to making this whole thing work.
Exactly. It's about using technology to free us up, to free us from all that boring, repetitive work that machines can do better anyway. And that frees us up, humans, to pursue our passions, to contribute to our communities in meaningful ways, to really explore our full potential.
It's like imagine a world where instead of being chained to a 9 to 5 just to pay the bills, you could wake up every day and focus on what truly inspires you, whether that's art or scientific discovery or even just spending quality time with the people you love.
That's exactly the kind of world the Venus Project envisions. And it's not just about, reimagining our economic systems. They've also put a ton of thought into how we design our cities to make them sustainable and improve our quality of life at the same time.
Okay, so picture this, right? They talk about these circular cities designed to be super efficient and live in harmony with nature. And they're talking about renewable energy being built right into the infrastructure, powering everything. We're talking wind turbines, solar panels, even something called photovoltaic cells. I mean, come on, that sounds like it's straight out of Star Trek.
I know, right? But it's not just about cool tech. It's about how it all fits together. The Venus Project, they're talking about cities where transportation is seamless and sustainable, buildings are designed to be energy efficient, and green spaces are integrated everywhere you look, which is great for, making people feel better.
Oh, and get this. They even talk about these things called maglev trains, those futuristic trains that levitate using magnets and can go, insanely fast.
Yeah.
It's like something out of a sci-fi movie, but they're saying it could be a reality.
The whole idea is that by really rethinking our approach to urban planning,
Yeah.
we can create living spaces that are functional, yeah, but also beautiful and socially engaging and good for the planet all at the same time. It's a pretty radical departure from the concrete jungles and sprawling suburbs we see today, for sure.
It really makes you wonder, what if we could just hit the reset button on city design? What kind of incredible spaces could we create? I mean, the possibilities are kind of mind-blowing when you really think about it.
No doubt about it. It really gets you thinking. It really does. It's pretty wild when you start imagining, all the possibilities. And it's not just about cities either. This whole reset thing, the Venus Project, they apply it to, get this, education too.
Oh, yeah. Now, this is where things get really interesting. They're basically like, forget everything you thought you knew about school. They want to ditch, all the boring stuff, the memorization, the standardized tests, all of it.
It's pretty radical, yeah. The Venus Project, they're all about fostering this lifelong love of learning, where it all comes from curiosity and a desire to actually solve real world problems.
So instead of kids stressing over exams, imagine a classroom that's more like a workshop.
Yeah.
Where they're encouraged to think for themselves, work together, actually apply what they're learning to real projects.
Exactly. That's the idea. It's about giving people the skills they need to be adaptable, to think critically, to contribute something meaningful, right? And the Venus Project, they really believe that this is going to be crucial in a resource-based economy.
Makes sense, right? If you're trying to manage resources for the whole planet, you're going to need some seriously creative problem solvers, which it kind of makes you wonder, how would this kind of education, how would it actually work when it comes to tackling those massive global challenges we're facing, like climate change, poverty, conflict? I mean, those are some big, hairy problems.
No doubt about it. Those are the big ones. And the Venus Project, they don't shy away from them. They actually tackle them head on. They argue that a lot of these issues, they're all connected, and that they stem from the very systems we're operating under right now. Systems based on scarcity, on competition, on, every nation for itself.
So instead of all that, they're suggesting, what, a more unified approach, like a global effort to manage resources and tackle these challenges together.
Exactly. They're saying that by shifting to a resource-based economy, by actually fostering real global cooperation, we can start to, actually address these problems at their root.
Okay, but let's be real for a second. Even if we're totally on board with this whole resource-based economy, how do we actually, flip the switch? Our entire world, I mean everything, runs on money. So how do we go from that to a system where, I don't know, everyone's just sharing and things are given out based on what people actually need? It's a big jump.
It is a big jump, yeah. But that's where the Venus Project, they point to technology as the answer. Specifically, this concept they call cybernated and participatory systems.
Cybernated. Okay, now there's a word I haven't heard in a while. Break that down for me. What are we even talking about here?
Essentially, they're talking about a future where you've got these super advanced computer systems, right? And the systems, they're using real-time data about, well, everything, from how much of each resource we have to what people actually need. And they use that information to manage everything, to make sure everyone has what they need, without any waste.
Okay, so kind of like a super smart logistical system for the whole planet that tracks everything, makes sure things are divided up fairly. But what about the participatory part? What does that mean?
Yeah, so the Venus Project, they're very clear that this isn't about some, robot overlord situation where computers are calling all the shots. They actually see citizen input as being absolutely crucial. They're envisioning a system where everything is transparent, everyone can see what's going on, and people have a real say in how things are run, at least at the local level.
Gotcha. So it's about humans and technology working together, not, one replacing the other. But, and I know this might sound cynical, even with all this talk about advanced systems and, global kumbaya, there's still that question of motivation. I mean, in a world without money, where everyone's taken care of, what drives people? What makes them want to achieve, to invent, to actually do anything?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And it's one that critics of the Venus Project, they bring up all the time. But their answer, essentially, is that we humans, we're motivated by more than just money.
You're saying, deep down, we don't just care about the Benjamins. Shocking, I know.
Right. They argue that people are naturally curious, that we're creative, that we actually want to make a difference, and that a lot of that gets stifled by this constant pressure to, just survive, to pay the bills. They believe that if you remove those constraints, if you create a world where everyone's basic needs are met, we'd actually see this, explosion of creativity, of problem solving, of innovation.
So it's less about, I need to pay rent, and more about, what can I create, or
Yeah.
how can I contribute, or what problem can I solve?
Exactly. And while that might sound kind of utopian, the Venus Project, they argue it's actually a more accurate reflection of who we are, of human nature. They say that this whole, dog-eat-dog competitive system, that's not who we really are.
That's a bold claim, for sure. But I can see the appeal, especially for folks who, are feeling kind of jaded or limited by the way things are right now. It makes you wonder, though, if we're not working for money in this kind of system, what happens to the concept of work itself? Do we all just, I don't know, lay around and watch TV all day? Well, I don't know about just watching TV all day, but the Venus Project, yeah, they definitely paint a picture of a world where work, as we know it, it's kind of out the window.
It's definitely a different way of thinking about it. Their idea is that automation would handle a lot of the stuff we consider work today,
Right.
which frees us up to, to pursue things we actually care about, things that light us up.
So yeah, maybe that means diving deep into scientific research, or I don't know, creating art, or coming up with totally new technologies, or even just spending our time helping out in our communities. I mean, it's a totally different way of thinking about work, that's for sure.
For sure. It turns everything on its head. And I mean, you can probably imagine not everyone's buying what the Venus Project is selling, right? I mean, there are definitely some critics out there, and some of their concerns, I gotta say, they're pretty valid.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to get caught up in the utopian vision, but then you have to come back to reality a little bit. How do you actually get from where we are now, a world, let's be honest, it's driven by, I don't know, competition, inequality, a whole lot of me first thinking. How do you get from that to this harmonious share and share alike society?
Right.
That's a big leap.
It is a huge leap. And that's Honestly, that's probably the biggest hurdle for the Venus Project. It's just the sheer scale of the change they're talking about. It would require like a level of global cooperation and a fundamental shift in like human values that
Yeah.
honestly, it can feel kind of impossible when you look at the world today.
And even if, and it's a big if, but even if we could somehow pull that off, there are still like the practical questions, right? Like
Mm.
in this resource-based economy,
Mhm.
who gets to decide, what gets made and who gets what?
That's the million-dollar question. And that's where, remember those cybernated systems we were talking about? That's where they come back in. The Venus Project, they say that these like super advanced computer systems, they'd be able to use all that real-time data, run it through these crazy algorithms, and figure out how to allocate resources in a way that's, both efficient and fair.
Okay, I get that. But then doesn't that just raise a whole other set of questions?
Yeah.
Like even if we're talking about algorithms, I mean, algorithms are made by people, right?
Yeah.
So how do you make sure those algorithms aren't, I don't know, biased or that they don't like accidentally make existing inequalities even worse?
Oh, yeah, you're hitting on a really important point, and it's something that the Venus Project, they actually talk about this. They emphasize how important transparency and oversight would be in like designing and implementing these systems. The idea is, you got to shine a light on the process, make sure everyone can see how decisions are being made. That way you can, at least try to minimize bias and make sure things are being done fairly.
It always comes back to that balance, doesn't it? Like finding that sweet spot between, what technology can do and, well, our own human values. Because we could have the most advanced systems in the world, but if they're not guided by some sense of ethics, some genuine care for people, things can go sideways really fast.
100%. And honestly, that's something we need to be thinking about like all the time, right? Not
Yeah.
just with the Venus Project, but with any kind of big societal change. Technology is a tool, and like any tool, it can be used for good or bad. It all comes down to us.
So where does that leave us? I feel like we've, I don't know, jumped headfirst into some pretty deep waters with the Venus Project. It's a vision of the future that's, I don't know, both kind of inspiring and a little bit terrifying, at least to me.
It's definitely both, right? I mean, it's easy to get caught up in the what ifs and, the potential downsides. But whether you think it's a utopian dream or a total dystopian nightmare, I think there's no denying that the Venus Project, it makes you think. Like, it really challenges us to rethink some pretty fundamental assumptions about, money, about work, about technology, even about, like, what it means to be human in a world where, let's face it, technology is becoming more and more powerful every day.
No doubt. It's definitely a lot to wrap your head around. But hey, that's what these deep dives are all about, right? Like taking a look at these big, complicated ideas, even if they sound a little crazy at first. Because even if you don't agree with everything the Venus Project is proposing, you got to admit, it makes you think differently, It opens up these new possibilities. It gets you imagining what could be.
Exactly. That's what's so great about these kinds of conversations. It's not about like blindly accepting or rejecting these big ideas, but actually engaging with them.
Yeah.
Asking those questions like what kind of future do we want? What role do we want technology to play? And what are we actually willing to do differently to create a world that, works for everyone?
Those are some seriously important questions no matter what you think about the Venus Project. So to our listeners out there, we're going to leave you with those questions. And hey, if you're curious about the Venus Project, go check it out, dig a little deeper, see what you think. And most importantly, keep those questions in mind. Keep those conversations going. Until next time, keep on diving.